Okay, so as you heard, I'm Nick Jones, and I'm going to talk to you about using the concept of food security in terms of thinking about dietary public health in high-income countries like the UK. So food security was spoken about earlier, and I think that was in the context that I think most of us tend to think about food security. So it's situations where there really is absolutely a kind of a starvation issue. So it's kind of undernutrition and very extreme examples of undernutrition. But so here I want to explore the idea that we can use it to explain the diet-related chronic diseases that we see are prevalent in countries like the UK. So the definition of food security is that when all people at all times have access to sufficient, safe, nutritious food to maintain a healthy and active life. Now that's a definition from the World Health Organization. Other people may have more expertise in this area in the room, and you may have other definitions that you use, but I want to stick to this definition today. And also, just working with this as a concept. So the actual measurement of food security can be done in many different ways. So again, I'm just sticking with this as the idea and working from this definition. So I think there are two things here that are really interesting to draw out from it. The first is access. Now, I think usually when we think about food security, and this is my first instinct, okay, so to think about kind of famine conditions in whole countries or regions, and that's a kind of logistical access. So there is probably enough food in the world, but it's not in the right place at the right time. In a country like the UK, we have a different limit. So most parts of the country, any given person will be within reasonable access of a range of food. But the issue we have here is that due to the economic system we have that makes that food available to be in those supermarkets, we don't necessarily say you can have it just by being there. So you actually have to be able to afford the food. So I'd say here, in a country like the UK, the access issue is based around affordability. It's whether or not you have enough access to money or some other asset to be able to buy the food. So the other thing I want to draw out is health. So usually, again, food security you might think of as an issue to do with absolute starvation and say issues like stunting, which come from undernutrition, but often issues we face in a high-income country are overnutrition and long-term chronic disease. So if we want food security to exist and people to be able to maintain a healthy and active life, that's not just about making sure they have enough food, it's about making sure they have enough of the right kind of food and that they don't, in trying to eat enough food, end up eating the worst sorts of food. Foods that we know from nutritional epidemiology are not foods you want people to eat to have long-term good health. So there's clearly more to food security than just an absence of hunger. So how does this benefit public health? Well, the first point I want to make is that to some extent, the price of food will affect diets. Some people disagree with this quite strongly, but if you're making decisions within economic constraints, as most of us are most of the time, unless you're very lucky, you will have to make decisions based on prices. And different foods cost different amounts, so at certain times you'll have a tendency to buy cheaper foods. And we know that in the UK and in many other countries, healthy foods are more expensive than less healthy foods. And we've also seen that at times of kind of nationwide economic fragility, households at all points across the income strata were shown to move towards diets which were both less expensive and less healthy. So this isn't necessarily just an issue for the poorest people. There's a kind of a point where everyone, to some extent, might be making some issues which can fall within the scope of food security. So they're buying slightly cheaper, less healthy foods due to economic constraints, rather than because they might want to do that. But of course, the price of food isn't the only thing that drives a diet. I wouldn't want to suggest that. The other thing which I want to say is that the price of food is driven by agricultural policy. Again, agricultural policy is not the only thing which drives the price of food, but it's one factor which we can expect to have an effect. Now, at the moment in the UK and the rest of the European Union, we subsidise energy-dense food production. So we have subsidies for oils and fats and other foods which are very energy-dense, whereas we don't subsidise fruit, which we generally want people to eat. And this is actually a policy response to a food security problem. But unfortunately, it's a food security problem from the middle part of the 20th century when there really wasn't enough food to eat. So I think that by framing these arguments in terms of food security, as people are happy to do when we don't have enough food, we can address this at the right level. So there are clearly individual issues, there are behavioural issues within diet-related disease. There are also very big structural ones which work at a systems level. And by thinking of them as a food security issue, we're able to start to see the problem in the correct way, and develop policies which target the correct root causes of these diet-related chronic diseases. And that's it from me, and those are the people who fund CEDA, so thanks to them.
Question from Nick.
Thank you for the talk. It's a great talk. I think what you brought out is a real issue where imagine all of yourselves having £3 in your pocket and you've lived by for the day. What do? You go to McDonald's and buy £1 burger. And but to address this, is there a way to encourage the public and also to make sure there's a political will to subsidize the right production of the right kind of food instead of going the wrong way? And if we've been doing this for the past forever years, so how do you make sure there's a political will to establish this? And as a member of the public, society, and university, how do we help?
Well, I'd say first of all that's a bit beyond my expertise, but I suppose as individuals, arguably the more healthy food we buy, the more likely it is that they can grow more, regardless of subsidy. I don't know if that works. Again, this is really kind of outside of my realm. And I think the idea about changing subsidy policy would be that the kind of the turbulence we see across Europe at the moment, it might lead to some good coming in terms of people. There's a bit more leeway to change things, but who knows? I really don't know. Sorry. But yeah, I agree with you. That's a good question.
Thank you. Thanks, Nick, again.
Thanks.